This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, hey folks, welcome back to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam and I'm your host. And helping take our leadership to the next level, we have Dr. Richard Blackaby.
Good to be with you once again, Sam, in the house, at least until a few days from now.
Yes, before you dash off down the road again.
The fall is upon us here, and that usually means heading to the airport.
Here's the thing, Richard. I don't think it really matters what season it is, because every season it seems to be your busy season.
So you notice that.
I'm sensing a pattern here. I've worked with you long enough now.
I think it was Carey Nieuwhof that said, if every season's a busy season, it's not a season, it's a life.
Yeah. You have a busy life, Richard. That's just part of it.
This is just busier. The fall is coming up.
Yeah. Well. Speaking of busy, there's no really segue that I have to transition into our conversation today. But I will say we grew some vegetables this year, and I noticed that you had maybe your most successful
in some
garden.
Areas. Well, lettuce-wise and cilantro-wise, a few areas.
You've made some. You've grown a few things this year, which is cool, and it's also an important part of being a leader is growth.
That wasn't a bad segue. Growing vegetables, growing leaders. Yeah, I can see that.
Pretty obvious.
I see what you did there, Sam.
It's pretty obvious and a bit clumsy, but here we are.
Yeah. Well, and it is funny because I have this little, what's it called? Hydroponic planter I got from my mom, and so every year I'm tweaking what worked well. Some things I tried to grow and it was a total disaster, like tomatoes.
I think I remember.
And then
tomatoes,
and they took over the place and it was awful. But and so year by year, every year it's like, okay, another attempt to grow what is most fruitful, productive, the least cumbersome. And I don't have it down yet. In fact, I'm going to try to do some things this fall, growing things. Of course, here in Atlanta, you can still grow things in the fall. It's not like Canada.
I've planted at least part of my fall garden.
So I need to take a round at that soon.
And I'll let you make the application here. But what's interesting, thinking about your hydroponic tower and the fact that we're, in the southeast here, you sort of have to narrow in on the things that want to grow in the space that you have.
Yeah.
And so, like you say, you don't grow tomatoes in a hydroponic tower. Mm-hmm. That's better to be left to greens and smaller plants and vegetables that do well in that context.
Yeah.
And the same with the heat. Like we're not, there are certain things that do well in the heat, and there's certain things that don't do well in the heat. And so then I'll let you apply that.
Sure. Well, and as leaders, when it comes to personal growth, you would think that we'd be even giving more attention to that than to our cilantro and lettuce. What is it that we flourish with? What areas in our life with a little attention would we grow and produce much fruit? And why wouldn't we be doing that? I just have a personal bias that any leader that is staying the same, it's a travesty. And it's an insult to the people you lead if you just keep leading the same way you always have, year in, year out. And we all know leaders like that, that they had some success, they get some things done, they're not bad leaders, and so they just kind of hunker down and they just keep cranking out the same leadership year after year. The problem, of course, is that life is becoming more complex. Technology is rapidly changing all the time. The workforce is changing. People are coming with new issues. Just think even just about all that COVID did to people and quarantining and fear of pandemics and wanting more personal space and so many things, wanting to work from home. Trying to lead a workforce like that now, you can't keep leading the same way you were 10 years ago because there's all kinds of issues that are new now. And so I want to just talk a little bit about that. I mean, really, in a sense, that's what all of our podcasts are about, is leadership growth. growth in your thinking, growth in your habits, growth in your perspective, your knowledge, your skills. And so I think that there's always somewhere, someplace that you can grow. And I think a lot of your power, your superpower in a sense as a leader, is your ability to grow. So you may not be the leader or all the leader that your church, your business, your organization needs you to be right now. You might not be the parent that your kids need you to be, but you have the power to grow, to become that, to rise to the occasion. And I've mentioned him before, but it's interesting. The Duke of Wellington, early on in his military career, had a bit of a setback and didn't do all that well in one of his. He was always brave and dashing, but just didn't always have the same the knowledge yet, the experience. And I love how his biographer said in the biography I read, he had learned what not to do, and that was at least something. And so it's kind of like, okay, well, I know I don't want to do that again. I don't want to fall on my face that way again. So how do I process that and avoid ever doing that again? And so sometimes even failures, if you have a growth mindset, you can walk away and you can say, okay, well, let me take some time to think about how to avoid that particular pitfall. And so there's always room to grow. And I would just suggest for leaders, if I was coaching one of our listeners, if one of our listeners came to me and said, Richard, how do I do this? Would you coach me, walk with me? One of the first things I would probably do is I'd put a piece of paper in front of you and I would just say, take some time to prayerfully consider 2 or 3 growth areas in your leadership right now, your life. And it doesn't mean a growth area doesn't mean you're bad at it. It doesn't mean it's necessarily a weakness. It just means that as you consider it, there's room for growth. You've not maxed that out yet.
We should say that it's not in totality of you as a leader. It's, I like that you've narrowed it down to 1 or 2 or 3 areas of your leadership. It's not like we're not trying to change the whole ship.
Right. You have to break it down.
Yeah.
You have to break it down. And I think that's the problem for some, especially people who don't understand leadership very well. They assume that they've got to just completely have an overhaul transformation, tear it all down to the studs and start over again. And of course, there's many different areas in your life. It could be a personal growth area, maybe just your walk with God. Just you want to get right down to the foundation and say, how is God going to use me more powerfully if I don't spend more time with Him and getting to know Him and knowing His Word, or developing my prayer life, or could be some areas of people skills, or could be just in your own personal life. And there's so many different ways. Certainly your own self-care. Maybe you need to lose weight. You need to perhaps maybe some guy, especially guys sometimes just need to get a more up-to-date wardrobe, or lots and lots of different ways where you would just say, it's not a huge thing, but I do feel like, something as simple that I had to learn years ago is that there are certain kinds of dress clothes, for instance, pants or a blazer or whatever. There's some that are designed to be more wrinkle-free. And if you've had to, there's been many times where I've flown on a plane and then had to walk off the plane and go straight to speaking. And so I've got to have clothes on that are not going to just have all kinds of lines and make me look frumpy when I get on a platform. And so, there's places where you say, you know what, I'm using some of this kind of cheaper pants and it shows, and it looks like I'm a zebra when I get off a plane or out of the car, and with so many lines going across. Maybe I just need to put some money in and have a bit of an overhaul, because it's true, when you get up in front of people, if you look frumpy, the way you dress, your hair, just so many things, then you've immediately left an impression, good or bad. And so just find 2 or 3 areas and don't try to take on too much. I think it's hard to focus for busy people. I think it's hard to focus on more than 2 or 3 at a time. And so nail those down. address those, and then you can move on to something else. And I think something else, just to say at the outset as well, is that you're going to have to address your insecurities. If you're insecure, it's just hard sometimes to address personal growth issues, because you can feel threatened. You don't assume that your personal worth is tied into what kind of leader you are. You're valued and loved by God, whether you lead well or not. If you acknowledge a shortcoming, it doesn't mean that you're a failure. It actually means that you're probably a good leader, because you want to keep growing. You want to keep identifying things that are not right. I know sometimes, especially if people feel kind of insecure, they're very reluctant even to acknowledge they have a growth area, because, well, what if that means that they want to fire me, or they don't want to promote me, or what if it gives someone else who's competing for the same position a leg up on me? So I'm going to just keep acting and talking like I've got it all together. You don't have to necessarily hang all your dirty laundry out for everybody to see, but personally, you need to be identifying some areas and very persistently, honestly addressing that. And I was thinking about this. I don't know why. I just had this thought came to mind. I can't imagine using a Mick Jagger illustration for improving your leadership. But maybe you saw, I think it was going around on social media or something, but a couple months ago, I think, there was just a little video of Mick Jagger working on his choreography for when he does a concert. And I had no idea he did that. That was actually quite interesting to me.
Yeah.
You know, like I thought he just pranced around on that stage just however the spirit moved. But he actually sort of choreographs it, where he moves and, you know, how he does it, what he does. I mean, you might, for better or worse, whatever you think of his choreography. But, you know, I thought to myself, hey, I'll tip my hat to the guy. Like, how old is he? Like, he's in his 70s, right?
If not 80s.
Think about how many times he's performed I Can't Get No Satisfaction. You know, it's like, how many times has he done that? Like, how many times has he been on a stage and he's made hundreds of millions of dollars doing it? And yet, at his age, in his 70s, having done how could you count how many times he's performed in some way?
Well, and I think what's so interesting is that's what separates the Mick Jaggers from all the retired rock stars.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Because he could obviously retire whenever he wanted to.
And to fill up and so I thought to myself, if he still has like some coach, some director, someone who's watching him, you'd think at that point, like, what are you going to tell a guy, a rocker like that?
Yeah, what are you going to tell Mick Jagger? Like, you know, I think if you did it this way,
trust me, I can, you know, help you do better. Like, but I thought I've never used Mick Jagger as a leadership illustration before.
Well,
but
hats off to you, Richard.
But
that was,
at the same
well
time,
done.
I thought, you know what? If a rock star is striving for excellence in his 70s, still thinking he can improve, and hey, maybe I should kind of pivot to the left instead of the right at this point of the song. Well, then, is there room for us as leaders who are oftentimes leading God's people, trying to lead to the glory of God? Should we not want to be doing that better as well than a rock star? So, you know, whatever it is you do, I mean, if you're a pastor, maybe your preaching could be better. Now, you know, I'm not holding myself up to say like I am the model of powerful, great preaching, but I'll tell you what, I there's a lot of stuff that gets put on live streamed and on Facebook and other things. And there are times where I just think, this is so suppressed. It's so dull. Here's a guy gets up in the pulpit and he's not even looking up at the audience. He's looking at his notes and he's trying to find his place. And he doesn't know what he's going to say, obviously, at first. And you just think, there's lots of room for improvement right there. And I just hear so many leaders, and oftentimes church leaders, who just feel like because they've done something for a long time that they don't need to improve it. Hey, I've been preaching 40 years. I'd say, well, if you've been preaching 40 years, you may have more reason than most to have an overhaul, refresher at this point. Yeah. Or maybe you've been teaching for a long time. Or maybe you know, we're still trying to grow a lot on this podcast and trying to do some things better. And even this morning, Sam and I were talking about ways to help maybe in PowerPoints and presentations and just so many things you can say, you know what, I'm really busy with this now. That doesn't mean I couldn't improve on it. It couldn't be better. And so I really want to encourage our listeners, think about, get a piece of paper, and it shouldn't take you all that long to be able to identify a couple of things. And maybe put them in different areas. Maybe one is a personal area of maybe I just need to trim 10 pounds. I need to get a better traveling blazer. I probably need to get a different hairstylist. What is it I need to do? It might be if you do public presentations. I think it's maybe time just to get a coach and have a couple of sessions where I just think through the way I've been doing something, or I've got this direct report that I just don't know that I'm handling them correctly. I need some help to think through a better way to help this person become what I need them to be in that role. And then maybe just one other thing before the break is just be willing to invest money and time and effort. It doesn't do all that much to plan to improve yourself if you don't then have a plan to invest time. And especially, I think, money as well. It's amazing to me, a coach could be so helpful, and yet there's so many people that don't get a coach strictly because of the money. It's like, well, I just don't want to put that kind of money in. Well, you know what? If you're like a pastor and you so much of your role hinges on delivering a good message each week, you need that to be good. I would not spend my whole career being a mediocre at something that maybe a couple of strategic coaching sessions could have really helped improve. And I remember a couple of years ago, I had maybe I won't get all the specifics of this group, but there was a group of pastors that I'd been in contact with, and basically it was a small group of pastors, and they were a very discouraged group of guys, and they desperately needed some help. Most of them were struggling. I'd say the vast majority of them, their ministries were in struggle mode, and so I'd come across them, and I reached out and offered to help them, and normally I wouldn't have, just based on where they were located and what the effort it would take to get there, and just the number of people involved, I wouldn't normally have invested that much time, but I just felt like I would offer my services to them. Now I needed them to cover my expenses, and I was going to charge them something for it, but it was going to be a great rate for them, a great deal. And I was going to give them a lot of attention. I was already starting to really think about how I could customize some training. And even when I wasn't with them, I would have a Facebook page, and I would be putting all kinds of growth resources on that, books and quotes, and interact with them. Wherever I was in the world, I want to walk with them and help them. And I was already like putting a lot of stuff together, and really just, I was really kind of brainstorming a lot of really great stuff that I could help these guys with. And then all of a sudden I got a message, and they had decided not to proceed. Now, they had the money, they could afford it, but basically their particular denomination had some kind of free service where it wouldn't cost them a dime. And some denominational person would come out and give and buy them lunch and pay all their own expenses and give them all a free book. And they thought, well, they're not Richard, but hey, it's free, so let's maybe just go with the free thing. I think that ended up being like a one-off, one trip by the person, and that was it. Like, I planned on walking with these people for the next couple of years, and I remember just at the time thinking, I'm not trying to say like I was going to be way better than this denominational person, but I do know that I was far more invested in customizing some leadership training and being available and walking with them, but they basically thought, well, we can get this help here cheaper, and so
it reveals a mindset, I think.
Yeah.
That is quite common, I think, especially among church leaders, because I think all church and nonprofit leaders, they're always thinking about the cost of something.
Yeah.
And I think too often, the cost of not doing something doesn't really get factored into the equation.
And, you know, I realized that. I pastored a church that didn't have a big budget. I understand you don't have a lot of money to spend, but this particular group, they wouldn't have had to necessarily spend a whole lot of their own money. They had in their own local fund, the funds basically to cover it. And so like I meet regularly with CEOs. Some of them fly in on corporate jets, private jets. I mean, I get it that there's different levels of resources that people have for training. But I really want to just encourage folks. There are just times where it's just worth it to invest some of your resources or your organization's resources for some really first-class quality help, and sometimes it really is true. You get what you pay for, and I thought often about that little group of pastors. They got one free kind of lunch and a little presentation by a denominational guy, and that was it. And I didn't see any noticeable improvement among those folks afterward. And it's sad because, again, especially when you're serving the Lord, you're ministering to God's people, people's eternities may be at stake. It just would seem like a little investment would be very much worthwhile and worth the expense.
Well, let's take a quick break here. This fall, we've got 2 opportunities to attend the Spiritual Leadership Coaching Workshop that Blackaby Ministries offers each year. Normally, we just have one in the fall in Jonesboro, but this year we have, in addition to the one in Jonesboro, we have one in Rapid City, South Dakota. And these are for folks who work with people. You might be thinking, well, I'm not interested in coaching. That's not really something I'm into. But I would say that anyone who deals with people can learn something from these coaching workshops. It's really learning about how to ask the right questions to help move people onto God's agenda. These coaching workshops will be October 23rd and 25th. That's going to be the one in Jonesboro, Georgia. And then October 12th and 14th will be the one in Rapid City, South Dakota. All the information about both of these can be found at blackabycoaching.org/workshop. There is a discount for early registration, and that goes through the month of August. And so if you would like to attend one of these, best to sign up sooner rather than later. Well, Richard, it is true that I think there is a mindset shift, especially among church leaders, that's required, I think, before new growth can even take place. And it is sad that so often church leaders are kind of the last to get the hint that no, this is a worthwhile investment, that you becoming a better pastor, a better organizational leader, a better leader, period, is worthwhile, and people suffer when you don't become a better leader.
Yeah. And it's sad when people that are trying to just earn more profits, more money, are willing to make a greater sacrifice than people that are serving God. And
I think too, it's interesting because I think the justification of being a good steward of resources or something like that prevents churches and organizations from becoming a better version of themselves.
Yeah.
There's a certain irony, I think, that it's like, well, we want to, be good stewards of the resources God's given us, and who knows what they end up spending money on, but it's like, well, you could have become a much more effective leader, a much more effective church.
And being a good steward does not necessarily mean not spending money.
Right, exactly.
Sometimes that's what they mean. It's like, I want to be a good steward, I'm not going to spend any money. And yet, when you read the parables of the talents, who is it that gets praised? The one who was investing heavily and taking some risk in order to see things grow. The one who buried the talent and didn't spend any of it and say, look, I didn't spend a solitary thing. Here it is. Well, when you don't spend anything, you don't get any return either. And so, I really want to encourage folks, and certainly in church, especially smaller churches, there's often sort of a scarcity kind of mindset. It's like, I'd love to have that book, but can't really afford it. I'd love to go to that seminar, or I'd love to have a coach, but I think it's kind of expensive. And I'd let people know too, like our ministry, Blackaby Ministries, has a whole range of coaches that we've certified, and we kind of have a whole range. So we've got some pretty high level guys. If you're a corporate leader and you want some coaching, that they can work with you, and they're going to charge you more corporate type rates. But we have some really good certified coaches that charge at all levels, and so you might not get our top coach, but you're going to get someone that will be very helpful to you. And so there's lots of options. Don't just assume I can't afford it. Just say, hey, I need some help, and so I'm going to have to be creative and find a way to get the help, but I'm going to get it. And another thing I would encourage people to do is just be aware of what other people are doing, because a lot of times we don't know what we don't know. And so I'm not telling you go copy what others are doing. But I think that's why, like, for instance, sometimes I like to listen to other preachers. It's not that I'm going to change my style to be just like them, but I want to see what other people are doing. I think sometimes watching a TED Talk can be interesting, how in just a pretty concise amount of time, people can communicate a profound truth, and watch how, when you only have 27 or so minutes, or whatever it is now, 22 minutes, whatever TED Talks are, that you can captivate an audience very quickly. And I think those are things, you watch that. Now, you may not do it the same way they did, but it might sort of pique your interest to say, wow, like within 30 seconds, that person had me in the palm of their hand. How could I maybe work on some of my intro so that I don't have to kind of ramble on for 10 minutes trying to, get the plane up in the air. And so watch what other people do. I remember years ago when I was just kind of starting to build a wardrobe for speaking in public kind of things. My brother-in-law, Jerry, I remember years ago, he got out of a car, like driving to an event, and he got out and he looked down and his pants were all creased. His jacket had lines all across the back. And then he saw someone else get out, and not a line. It looked crisp and sharp and fitted, and the guy just stood out. He just looked so much more professional than these other frumpy guys. And so he just asked him, he said, hey, do you mind if I ask you, like, what kind of suit is that? Of course, they're usually more expensive. But my brother-in-law could just tell the difference. And so he asked, and he found out. He said, where do you get those kind of suits? And what you discover is you don't necessarily, and early on for me, I couldn't afford a lot of clothes like that, but you could wear them. It was easy. You wore them a lot. I wore them out, but look around and see what other people are doing, what they're using, and maybe ask them, do you ever use a coach, and who do you use, and what books are you finding that are really helpful to you, and watch some stuff online and just see what how they're doing it. And then again, I'm not trying to tell you just to copy what other people are doing, but it will give you ideas. And when you listen maybe if you're a public speaker and you see someone that really just captures people's attention quickly, and you could hear a pin drop, everyone is listening to their every word, then stop and ask yourself, well, now, what did they do? How did they do that? Are there some lessons I could take from that might help my presentation? Don't ever feel like you're locked in. This is just how I speak. This is how I lead. This is how I deal with problems. No, you can always improve. And so that's why I think you have to be out there and observing other people. And I enjoy that. I'm a public speaker. And so when I see someone else presenting and doing a good job, I don't feel threatened. I don't beat myself up and say, oh, I wish I could be that good. I'm just watching, and I'm learning, and I'm thinking, you know what? I think I could do some of that. That's a good lesson, a reminder for me to avoid that and to try more of this. And so be aware of what other people are doing. And we mentioned this already, but I think most leaders would benefit from a coach. And again, a coach is not necessarily someone that you meet with every week for a year or 5 years. You might meet with them 1 to 3 times, 6 times. Just invest a certain amount of time, and you might once a month or something for 6 months, and just say, I'm going to just devote 6 months to really tackling this issue, developing some good habits, getting on top of this problem, coming up with some new skills and insights that I can carry on with. Maybe after that, I meet with my coach once a year, just kind of like a annual checkup, just to see how things are going. But don't be afraid of that. And I would also just say, don't be afraid of just asking for honest feedback. Sometimes as you're trying to think, well, where do I need to grow? Maybe you need to talk to some people, talk to some of your direct reports if you dare, and say, you know what, I'm just praying right now about how I can continue growing as a leader, and you work with me all the time. Is there any way that perhaps I could work better with you if I made some adjustments, or some areas maybe I could be stronger in my the way I lead you and work with you, and you know, you never know what you're going to get with that. You have to be careful maybe who you ask, but in different ways, you don't have to be maybe even that direct, but be open to feedback from people, and to hearing what they say. And sometimes you have to read between the lines. People are trying to be sensitive to your feelings, but if you start hearing some of the same things over and over again, that might be a clue that it's surfacing a growth area for you. And then if you are going to seek to grow, obviously have a definite goal of some sort, whether it's a process. I'm going to start exercising 3 days a week. You know, we've talked before about whether you set a goal and say, I'm going to lose 20 pounds, or whether you say, I'm going to start doing some form of exercise 30 minutes at a time, 3 days a week or something, or I'm going to stop eating desserts with my meals for the next year or 6 months, so I can reduce my sugar intake and hopefully lose a bit of weight, or but have some specific goals and something that is measurable. If you really want to improve maybe your presentations in public, then ask yourself, okay, well, what is it I'm trying to do here? Maybe maybe I'm taking too long to get into the meat of my presentation, or maybe I'm saying too much or too much, and so I'm going to do some things to really cut back on that, and then I'm going to watch a video of my last presentation. I'm going to count how many I said, or how many I said, or other bad habits, how many times I scratched my nose while I was speaking in public. But find a way to measure and evaluate progress. Am I doing any better? Yeah. And then just hold yourself accountable. Don't just kind of make a promise or a commitment and then have no follow-up. And it might be that you need to have an accountability partner, or maybe a group that you meet with, and you might share, these are some of the things I'm working on right now. So why don't you ask me next time we get together how many times I've done that, or have I seen any improvement? But I need somebody that's going to hold my feet to the fire so that I actually do improve. And I know that meeting is coming, and I've got to get my act together. But I think the main thing is you don't want to go into next year and be the exact same leader you were this year. Mm-hmm. So as we're entering the fall season here, as we do this podcast, we're not that far from a new year. It's looming before us. What adjustments, what goals do you want to make so that next year is your most successful, fruitful, productive year as a leader yet? Well, for that to happen, you're probably going to need to improve in some way, the way you've been leading this year. It doesn't mean you haven't that you've been a bad leader. This might have been the best year you've had so far. Great. Now, what adjustments could you make so next year is even better? And as a leader, no matter how old you are, no matter how long you've been doing it, there's still always room for growth. And so I want to encourage people. It may not require a major overhaul, but take time, get a piece of paper, get your Bible, spend a little time with the Lord and say, God, so what would those 2 to 3 areas be in my life that I need to focus on next? And I'll tell you, you'll be glad that you did, and the people that you lead will be glad you did as well.
All right. Well, let's leave it there.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.